The opioid crisis in America is without a doubt one of the biggest issues that this country is facing. On average, every year, 50,000 people in the United States die from opioid-related overdoses. So the story I have for you guys today is great news because finally somebody is being held accountable for this completely avoidable crisis that has been manufactured to boost profits for the pharmaceutical industry. Before I get into the story, some of you guys might already notice, but I've been listening to the feedback that I've been getting from the audience, and I'm happy to announce that I just bought a new microphone for the show. Previously, I technically didn't have a mic. I was just recording on a regular DSLR camera. I know the audio wasn't great. I had a decent amount of people telling me that they love the content, but they cannot stand the audio quality. But even though right now I have no income coming in, I spend most of the money I have in my bank account on this microphone, and I don't regret it for a second. I cannot put into words how much I love doing this show, and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. I feel like we talk about very important issues that don't get a lot of attention, so I want to make sure that it's as good as possible, even though I'm not getting paid for this at all. Also, I know absolutely nothing about recording equipment, and I barely know how to edit a video together. This is a Blue Yeti microphone, so if anybody has any tips or advice to make the audio better, let me know in the comment section. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. So Purdue Pharma, the producers of OxyContin, recently settled a case with the state of Oklahoma for $270 million for their role in the opioid epidemic in that state. Now, to us poor folk, that may sound like a lot of money, but the fact that they even settled, combined with some of the details of the story that I'll get into later, leads me to believe that if this case went to trial, they would have lost and they would have been on the hook for a lot more money. The lawsuit was initiated by Oklahoma State because they claimed Purdue Pharma downplayed the risk of the drugs, then tried to oversell the benefits in order to get it prescribed to more people, and this led to thousands of deaths in the state. This is a stunning fact that I wasn't aware of until I heard it on Democracy Now!, and I'll link the video below. More people died from opioid overdoses in Oklahoma than have died in car accidents. That's fucking insane. So the Attorney General actually gave a breakdown of how the money from the settlement is going to be used. $100 million is going to go to a foundation that is dedicated to building treatment centers across the state. Also, Purdue Pharma is supposed to give that foundation $15 million every year to fund the centers. They will also be required to provide addiction treatment medication free of cost. So, like that drug you take that can reverse an opioid overdose, I forget what it's called, probably should look it up. And $60 million to cover the expenses that the state had to spend on the lawsuit. So up front, it looks like this money is going to go to good use in terms of actually addressing the opioid crisis in the state. But I do have some concerns. First of all, the kind of addiction treatment center that they end up building is important, because here in the United States, there's basically a whole industry of addiction treatment therapy, and a lot of them are bullshit and don't really actually help people with their addiction. So Oklahoma State better do serious research to find what programs and treatment styles work the best so they can actually help these people with their addiction rather than just putting them in some bullshit 12-step program, and as soon as they get out, they go right back to abusing the drug. Now to the case itself. Apparently, the Oklahoma Attorney General and Purdue Pharma reached some sort of agreement as part of the settlement that the details and the evidence gathered by the Attorney General's office won't be made public. That is obviously a concession that does nothing but protect Purdue Pharma. Just think about it. Whatever the Attorney General's office found was so damning that one of the largest, most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the entire country, with their army of lawyers, had to say, you know what? You got us. We'll settle this for almost $300 million. Whatever it is they had would have nailed Purdue Pharma's ass to the wall. Not only in this case, but possibly in many other lawsuits that will inevitably follow this one. Oklahoma is a deep Republican state. We all know that the Republican Party is a poster child for corruption. They are basically just a front political organization for any industry willing to pay them off. I mean, look who the last Attorney General for Oklahoma was. Scott Pruitt. He will go down in history as one of the most, if not the most, corrupt cabinet officials in modern history. Pruitt was a puppet for the fossil fuel industry, and his entire career was dedicated to serving their interests. When he was the Attorney General in Oklahoma, he sued the EPA over the Clean Air and Clean Water Act 14 times so that coal companies in his state can pollute wherever and whenever the fuck they feel like. Long story short, what I'm saying is I would not be shocked to find out that there was some corrupt backroom dealing that led to this case being buried the way that it was. So even though this lawsuit was a good precedent to set, because now other states will be more inclined to sue the pharmaceutical companies who've been fucking over Americans for a profit. It would have been much better if the American people knew exactly what these pharmaceutical companies were doing and are so frantically trying to cover up. But honestly, the evidence that is publicly available from other lawsuits and scientific studies and investigative journalism is so damning and clearly shows who these pharmaceutical companies are and that they are clearly exacerbating the opioid crisis in the country for profit. I'm genuinely curious what it is that they didn't want to come out. I want to give you guys some statistics that show the magnitude of the opioid crisis in the United States. 85% of all opioid prescriptions in the world are for people in the United States, even though the US only accounts for 5% of the world's population. Every year, doctors here in the United States write around 250 million prescriptions for opioids. Nearly 64,000 Americans died in 2016 from drug overdoses. 42,000 of them involved prescription opioids. The CDC estimates the total economic burden of prescription opioid misuse in the United States is $78 billion a year, including the cost of healthcare, lost productivity, addiction treatment, and criminal justice involvement. This crisis is wide-reaching and it's only getting worse. At this point, I don't see how anyone can make the case that these executives of these pharmaceutical companies aren't criminally liable for this opioid epidemic. Because even with all this publicly available data about how dangerous their product is, not only do they continue to make it, they've sustained a multi-billion-dollar campaign to block effective regulation of their product and also push these pills onto millions of unsuspecting Americans. According to OpenSecrets.org, the pharmaceutical industry spent $26 million on congressional races in the 2018 midterm election cycle, evenly split among Republicans and Democrats. You think that was bad? In 2018 alone, the industry spent over $280 million lobbying politicians. I'm sure most of my audience understands that in the US, our politics are based in a corrupt system of legalized bribery. Industries give money to politicians in order to get favorable policy in return. In the case of the pharmaceutical industry, what they get for their bribes are tax cuts, giant government subsidies for research and development, but also they basically get to write their own regulation for the industry. In a sane world, our government would have stepped in a long time ago to provide necessary regulation to prevent this opioid crisis from getting out of hand. But since they are bought and paid for by the industry, they have no interest in upsetting some of their top donors. I also mentioned that they spent billions of dollars pushing their products onto unsuspecting Americans. Now let me explain that. Back in 2008, CBS found that 35% of doctors said that they accepted free travel paid for by pharmaceutical companies. Also, 28% of doctors said that they were paid by pharmaceutical companies to give lectures or conduct drug trials. I forget exactly which year it was, but pharmaceutical companies spent $4 billion marketing their product to consumers. In that same time period, they spent $24 billion marketing to doctors. There was a study that found in 2013 the top 10 pharmaceutical companies spent more money in marketing than they did in research and development. So millions of unsuspecting Americans go to their doctors expecting that they're going to provide the most effective and safe treatment option for whatever it is they're going to them for. But then come to find out, a lot of these doctors are influenced, if not flat out bribed, by the same pharmaceutical companies who they are trying to write you a prescription for. This is so fucking gross and slimy. Most people understand how gross the healthcare system is because of what the private health insurance companies are doing and what the pharmaceutical companies are doing. But now you find out that the doctors are in on it too, and it's just really shameful. And all I kept thinking about when I was doing research and prepping for this story is this epic failure called a drug war that has been going on in this country for decades. Our corrupt government has dedicated the full force of our law enforcement agencies and departments to going after people for using and selling drugs that are clearly far less dangerous than these opioid prescriptions. If you actually did want to initiate a drug war to protect the people, it would be the exact opposite of this drug war that is mostly targeting marijuana use. You'd be going after the pharmaceutical executives who are knowingly pushing their deadly products onto millions of unsuspecting Americans and claiming it's going to make them better, all so they can boost their already absurd astronomical profits. The logic of all these drug warriors like Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris back when she was Attorney General in California and District Attorney in San Francisco is just absurd on its face. There has never been a single person in the history of this planet to overdose on marijuana, but it's classified as literally the most dangerous drug you can get your hands on, and people are prevented from even doing research on it on a federal level. And it's funny because one of the main arguments that people try to make against marijuana is that it's some type of gateway drug. And once you smoke weed, you're gonna be doing heroin next week. And I never bought into that bullshit argument because you can make the same case about alcohol. I'm sure anybody who's done cocaine and meth, heroin, I'm sure they all drank a beer or drank some type of liquor before they graduated to cocaine and heroin. So you can make that argument for anything. But following their logic, if you want to talk about gateway drug, opioids are the clearest gateway drug because people get the prescription, they get addicted to the prescription, and when they can no longer afford it or they can no longer get a prescription for it, they still have that addiction. Then they turn to drugs like heroin and meth. But you will never hear the establishment talking about how opioids are a gateway drug because it's not convenient for their narrative. Like I mentioned, there are about 70,000 overdose deaths in the United States a year, and 50,000 of them come from opioids alone. These legally prescribed opioids kill more people than all other illicit drugs combined. Yet the people who sell them get to take home millions of dollars in profit, leaving a wake of destruction in their path. And in some places, if you get caught with a joint, your ass is getting locked up, it's going on your record, and you're probably going to do time, depending on how strict the drug laws are in that area and how much weed you have on you. The opioid epidemic is one of those issues that perfectly encapsulates how broken and corrupt the entire system is. The criminal justice system, our political system, and our media. Here in the US, as long as you wear a suit and tie and cloak your disgusting actions under the guise of a legitimate business, you can get away with anything. This is a little off topic, but look at the Wall Street executives. Wells Fargo opened over 2 million fake accounts with their customers' real information like names, addresses, social security numbers. And sometimes they will take money out of their customers' real accounts and put it into these fake accounts in order to make it look like they were doing more business so that their stock prices would continue to go up and executives would continue to take home these insane bonuses that are tied to the stock prices. If a regular person was caught opening 5 fake bank accounts, their ass would be in prison because bank fraud and identity theft are federal crimes and felonies. But the person who was in charge of this unit of Wells Fargo that was doing this, she got to retire, no prosecution, and got over $100 million exit package. That's how shit works in the United States. So hopefully the people in Oklahoma will get some type of relief from this epidemic because of this money. But I hope a whole lot more states follow suit and take on these pharmaceutical companies.